In this video, I'm gonna show you how you can create Hollywood level destruction effects using only Blender. This method will work with any model you can find, but I'm gonna show you how you can create a basic building model just using a couple of image textures. So we're gonna build this tower, prepare and simulate the destruction, add some detail with windows shattering, and then finally we're gonna add some smoke to bring it all together and render out this pretty awesome effect. So hopefully if you decide to follow this video from start to finish, you're gonna learn a bunch of useful tips for making these kinds of effects in Blender. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the tutorial and create this effect. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is just open up a new Blender scene like this, and we can actually go ahead and delete the camera and the lamp like this. Alright, so we want to give this guy a material, so just press the material tab right here and give it a new material. We can rename this something like building or whatever. And we want to change the base color to image texture. And right here, you can just open up your image texture. This is a really fun way. You can just take an image, import it right here. And now you'll see that it's actually been applied to the cube like this. But we want to change the UVs to have it line up a little bit more. So first off, let's just scale this up a little bit. Let's hit U for unwrap. Just select cube projection. You'll see already we have something that looks a bit better, but what we can do is actually go through and select every face like this and bring the corners of the UV to actually match the corners of the building like this. And unless you have crazy distortion on your image, this is actually going to line up the texture really well. And you'll notice that there is some distortion, like here for example, but don't worry about that because that's gonna actually straighten out once we add more geometry like that. Right, so let's just go through and do that for all of the faces. Okay, perfect. So now you see that the texture is actually lined up pretty well on the sides right here. For the roof and the bottom of the building, we can just unwrap those and place them somewhere to just give them a flat material. Okay, so let's go right ahead and start adding in some more details. Your best friend right here is just adding loop cuts like this. So just hit Ctrl R and kind of hover the mouse over the edge that you want to cut in half. You can move it like this and just left click to leave it there. Right, so once we've added those loop cuts, we can just go ahead and hit E to extrude it. But this gives us a new problem because these textures on the side right here, they're kind of stretched out. And the easiest way we can fix that is just to select them all, hit U and unwrap those once more. Head to the UV editing tab and just place them somewhere where it kind of makes sense. See, but it's kind of distorted, so let's try a different unwrapping option. Let's go with cube projection, and that kind of fixes that stretching issue that we had. Right, so I'm gonna keep doing that to the entire building, and then we can move on to the windows. Now we want to start working on the windows, so just add some loop cuts like this. And then like that. Alright, so I'm actually gonna go ahead and select all of these faces right here and inset them a little bit before I continue. Hit E to extrude them. And then we can select the individual windows. Extrude, I to inset, extrude, something like that. Now we want to separate the windows into a separate object. So just keep them selected like this. Hit P and choose separate from the selection. I'm gonna do the exact same thing on this side. And I'm not gonna bother with the windows here and here, since we're gonna explode the building from this angle. Great, let's take these two objects we have right here and hit Ctrl J to join them to one object, and let's rename it to windows. And the base right here, we can rename it to, let's say, building. One super quick way we can add some detail is just to go to the shading tab and find the material for the building right here. You can see this is our material. And what we can do is just add in a bump node. So just Shift A and search for bump right here. It's gonna show up and you can just add it in like like so. Connect that to the normal input on the BSDF node and just bring the color from the image texture to the height of that bump node. And you'll see that kind of gives us this detail right here. And it's more obvious what it does if we just remove the base color like this. So it's using the dark and highlighted parts of the texture to give the illusion of some bump detail like this. You can see that works really well with the wooden boards like that. Let's make it so that these windows actually look like windows. So we can remove this building material right here and add in a new one and name it windows. Let's go to the shading tab, bring down the roughness, increase the specular and give it some transmission like this. To actually make them transparent in Eevee, what we need to do is go to the render settings and enable screen space reflections right here. And then we want to enable refractions as well. So now if we go to the material properties under the Windows material, you can scroll all the way down to settings right here and just enable screen space refractions right here. You can change the IOR right here. So that's like the refraction index. We want to keep it pretty close to 1. To give the windows some more randomness, what we want to do is add in a bump node, just like we did with the building material. But this time, instead of using the image texture, we want to add in a Musgrave texture. And just hook that up to the height of the bump node. And if we play with the scale a little bit and decrease the strength right here, you can see that kind of makes it so it's not completely flat like this, but we have some distortion like that. Right now you can see we have something that actually looks pretty good, and the geometry is still really simple. Before we continue, let's actually add in some floor planes. So let's move that to somewhere like here, here, and here I think should be good. Scale those down a little bit, hit Ctrl J to join them into one object. Then we want to give them the building material. Go to edit mode, hit A to select all the faces, hit U and select cube projection. Go to the UV editing tab and just kind of repeat that process that we did last time and move them to a part of the texture that makes sense. Right, that's perfect. And just subdivide it like this a couple of times. Just shift select the rest of the building and hit Ctrl J to join them. Alright, give this building object an array modifier and change it so that we duplicate it on the Z axis. Just set the relative offset on the Z axis to 1. And now we can actually increase the count like this to stack them on top of each other like that. And I'm actually gonna add in a new array modifier and duplicate it 1 time on the x-axis as well. Now let's do the same thing for the windows, but here we're gonna need to change the relative offset manually to have it match the buildings like this. All right, now let's apply the modifiers, so just hover the mouse right here and hit Ctrl A. Right, so I think that looks really good, but what I want to do before we start fracturing is just add in some more randomness with a couple of details. So I'm gonna model some simple air conditioners and just place them around the building. And you can really keep on adding details like this for a long time, but I'm pretty happy with how this looks, so I'm gonna go right ahead and start the fracturing process. Just select the windows and hide them for now. Then we want to make sure that we have enough geometry to work with. So I'm just selecting this building base right here and adding in a subdivision surface modifier. So by default, this kind of smooths it out like that, but we want to set it to simple so it keeps the original shape, but adds in some more geometry. And I think a value of 3 should be great here. So let's just apply that and see what that looks like. Right, so perhaps that was a bit too much. Let's go back and make that 2 instead and apply that one more time. And then select all of it, except the windows. Shift select the building base and then hit Ctrl J to join it all to one object. Alright, let's go ahead and start the actual fracturing. So just select this building object that we have right here. Hit Object, Quick Effect, Quick Explode. So first off, this kind of messes up the material, but we can fix that really easily by just going to the material properties and disabling show backface. I don't know why it does that, but you know, just disabling show backface fixes that right away. And the second thing you'll notice is that if we hit play, this modifier stack actually breaks this building apart in many pieces. And we can increase the number of pieces under the particle system that has been added. So I'm gonna set that to maybe 500. And if you just hit play, you'll see the density of those pieces. Alright, so go to the physics tab of the particle system and change this physics type to none. So it's gonna be like cracks in the mesh, but it's not gonna fall apart like that immediately. So let's just go to the modifier tab and apply these modifiers in that order. So you go with the explode modifier first and then apply the particle system. Right, great. So now that we go to edit mode, you'll see that there are these cracks throughout the geometry of the building. So what we want to do is hit A to select everything and then just hit P and separate by loose parts. So you can see we have these pieces right here that have been broken apart from the original mesh, but you'll notice that their origin is kind of messed up. So we need to fix that before we simulate. Select all of them, just hit object, set origin and select origin to center of mass surface. So unhide the windows and select everything and move it so it stands like just above the center point of the scene. Then we want to go to object, rigid body and add active. Alright, so the problem we run into if we just play it right here is, first off, it's gonna be super slow, and secondly, it's just gonna explode out like this. That's because we're using this collision type called convex hull. So basically what that does is, if we take this object for example, it basically creates a separate object that goes around it like this, but it doesn't take these indents in the mesh into consideration, it just creates it like around the mesh. So if something is like right here, for example, Blender is gonna think that that is colliding with this object. We can change that by setting the collision type to mesh instead. So that's gonna use the actual mesh of the object to collide with. But that's gonna be way harder on the computer and it's gonna be much slower. But what we can do is actually decrease the steps of the rigid body simulation right here. So under the scene properties, we find this rigid body world drop down right here. And what I'm gonna do is actually set these substeps per frame to 1. So just select everything and set this one to mesh, right click it and select copy to selected. So that's gonna copy that setting to all of our pieces. So let's add in a plane, scale it up a bit and give that a rigid body, but this time we want to set it to passive. That means it's just going to stay stationary throughout the simulation. Right, so as you can see, that kind of just falls to the ground. And we can also notice the downsides of using lower substeps per frame with the rigid body world right here, because we have a lot of pieces falling through the ground like that. Maybe we can increase the substeps per frame to like 2 or 3 later. Before we do that, let's just connect all of these pieces together. So just select 2 pieces, go to object, rigid body and hit connect. On this little menu that appears, we want to change the connection pattern from selected to active to chain by distance. Now we can delete this constraint, select all of the pieces right here and do the exact same thing. So we want to go to object, rigid body and hit connect. Just give that a couple of minutes to calculate. Just keep in mind that the more pieces you have, the longer it's gonna take to generate these constraints between them. Alright, so about 10 minutes later we have these constraints that got created between our rigid body objects. So if you just search for a constraint in the outliner right here and just hit A, what we want to do is just hold Alt and check this breakable box. Alright, so as you can see, we still have this problem with the pieces passing through the ground plane right here. And the only way we can really fix that is by increasing the substeps. So I'm gonna try to use a substep of 2 and see if that is enough to fix the collision problem. So the final settings that worked good for me was to set the constraints to point and also uncheck this disable collision box and make them breakable with a threshold of 10. And then with all that I used a substeps per frame of 2. And now we can just hide these constraints and set the end frame to a reasonable number. So I'm going with 150 frames. And we can change the cache of the rigid body world to end at that frame as well. And what actually I wanted to start at like 10 frame 20 or something, so we have a bit more time before the destruction. Alright, that's great. Let's add a bit more detail to the destruction. So I want this part of the building to just fall straight down into like thousands of pieces. I'm just gonna hit C to bring up this selection tool and select some of the pieces like this. Shift select one of the pieces and hit Ctrl J to join all of those pieces into a big one. Then we can repeat the process that we did earlier. So just go to quick effects and hit explode, and we can use maybe 1,000 pieces for this one. So just apply the explode modifier. Then we want to go into edit mode, select everything, hit P and separate by loose parts. So now we have these really small pieces right here. Go to object mode again, hit object, set origin to center of mass surface. And then we can give these guys a rigid body as well. So just go to object, rigid body, add active. These pieces aren't going to be constrained or anything, so they're just gonna fall off. That looks pretty good, but I think I want to have something that kind of explode these pieces right here out a little bit. To do that, I'm just gonna add in an icosphere, and I'm just gonna scale that up and give it a rigid body, but I'm setting this one to animated. Let me just increase the size of this guy a little bit, so it kind of pushes these pieces out. Go to the rigid body world settings right here and set the simulation start to frame 20, and we can have it end at frame 200. Let's also set the end frame of the scene to 200 as well. So that should give us 20 frames where no simulation is taking place, and then on frame 21 it starts simulating. And I think we are ready to bake this, so I'm just gonna hide the constraints and the icosphere. And then I'm just gonna go to the rigid body world and hit bake right here. And this progress bar will appear, so you just have to wait until that runs to 100%, and then we'll see the final simulation. Alright, so once that was done baking, this is what we have. Okay, so if you're happy with how the simulation looks like, you can go ahead and apply that to keyframes to speed up the smoke workflow. So just select all the rigid body pieces, go to object, rigid body, and hit bake to keyframes. Alright, so now you can see that Blender removed the rigid bodies and added these keyframes instead. And we can search for the constraints right here and select all of those and just delete those. You can also delete this collision sphere that we had right here. So we want these windows to kind of explode out once the explosion happens. So we're actually going to use the explode modifier once more, but we're going to keep them as particles. First of all, let's just go to edit mode and hit A to select everything, and then right click and subdivide a couple of times. Now we can hit object, quick effects, and select quick explode. As you can see, if you jump to frame 1, we have 100 pieces right now. We want to increase that to like 10,000 or something. And you'll see that breaks the windows apart like this. I think 20,000 will look good. Under the particle system, we can change it so that the frame start and end is at frame 20. And let's increase the lifetime to 200. So I think that looks really good with the broken windows, but it looks a bit too uniform. So let's go to the particle system, and under the velocity tab we can add some randomness to it, something like 5, and see what that looks like. Right, so now that we're happy with the destruction itself, I think it's time to add some smoke to accompany it. And the way the smoke system in Blender works is that we have one object that will be our smoke domain. I'm just using a cube right now, and then we can set the objects inside of here to emit the smoke. Go to the physics tab and make this a fluid domain. And you can see this creates this wireframe rendering so we can see through it. And it will also allow us to create smoke inside of this box right here. Now we can select all of our animated pieces. Just shift select one of them and give it a fluid. Then we want to make sure that we have the copy attributes add-on enabled. Under the add-ons we can search for copy attributes, and this one should be enabled. So just make sure this box is checked right there, and then you can save your preferences right here. Hit Ctrl C and then select copy modifiers and just keep it at smoke, but we want to change the flow behavior from geometry to inflow. And we also want to check this initial velocity box right here. Now we can just go through and right click and select copy to selected. So now we actually have these settings for all of the pieces. Let's go to the smoke domain and change the cache frame start to 20 and have it end at frame 200 as well. To make it actually look okay, we want to increase the resolution to, I think, at least 200. Also, we want to make sure that the bottom of this box is right at our ground plane, and that allows us to hit this box right here to kind of make the smoke collide with the bottom of this domain. So the smoke will go down and kind of bounce up and create this big smoke cloud. Right, so I just played a couple of frames, and I think the smoke is working out great, but I feel like the smoke, say the smoke from this piece, for example, kind of spawns a bit too far away from the actual piece. The way you change that is under the flow source right here, and you can change this surface emission to be a smaller number. So I'm gonna do that to all of the pieces, and then I'm gonna bake it. So I'm just selecting all of the pieces. Then I'm gonna set this surface emission to 0.5 and right click it and select copy to selected. Go to the cache drop down right here, and I'm gonna change the cache type from replay to modular, and I'm also gonna select is resumable, so we can pause and resume the simulation if we need to. I'm just gonna hit bake date, and it's gonna start baking the smoke. Right, so once you've baked this, you want to go down to this noise tab right here and just check that box right there, and you'll see that your smoke will temporarily disappear like this. Now we can just leave this upres factor at 2, I think that's gonna be good, and just hit bake noise. Alright, so once the noise is done baking, you can see that we have a bit more detail in the smoke like this. If we go to rendered mode, we'll see that we still have all of our textures and also the glass. So to be able to actually see the smoke that we simulated, we're gonna need to give it a material. So just select the smoke domain like this and hit new right here, and then go straight to the shading tab. Right, so we want to remove this principled BSDF node and bring in a principled volume node, and then we're gonna hook that up to the volume output. To make this smoke actually look good, we can go to the render settings, and under the volumetrics tab we want to enable volumetric shadows. What I also like to do is to decrease the tile size from 8 pixels to 2 pixels, and you can see that kind of allows us to see more of the detail in our smoke. And you can also go ahead and tweak the color and density of the smoke, and that will give you different effects. You probably want to go ahead and increase the sample size of the volumetric effect, so you can do that by just multiplying this with 2 perhaps, and just copying that number and placing it under the volumetric shadows as well. So that will give us a bit more samples for the smoke. We can actually go ahead and create a lamp object in the center of the explosion and have it animated so it kind of flashes. So that will give the effect that we have some kind of explosives inside the building. So just go ahead and add in a point lamp. So we can give that a value of 0 at frame 20, and then just right click that and hit insert keyframe. Then we can skip a frame ahead. So just give that a new keyframe. And then what I want to do is jump 2 frames ahead. Then I'm gonna give it a value of 0 again. And now we want to go ahead and actually give this a kind of fiery color. So make it a little orange like that. After that, I just added some background materials. Of course, enabled motion blur. Then I rendered out this final effect. Guys, over 12,000 people are watching this channel. That's absolutely insane when you think about it. And I'm just so grateful that all of you guys want to keep learning and that you enjoy my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and also big thanks to my subscribers. Let me know what you think about this effect as well as this video format with these longer videos like this, and feel free to suggest a future tutorial or just subscribe to stick around for the next one. Another thing that I wanted to tell you guys about was that I've gone into a partnership with a company called Upbeat. Upbeat is a service for video creators where they have music and sound effects and all that stuff. So from now on, I'm gonna use their music on my videos. I'm gonna link it down below if you want to check it out. And if you're thinking about buying their premium subscription, all the profit is gonna go back to this channel. So that would be a great way for you to support these videos as well. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.